What's up, everybody? Coach Mills here, coming at you with a brand new Valorant video. And in this video, we gotta break down one mistake for every single agent. Now, while many of you are fucking nasty at your given main and you pop off pretty consistently, there's always some big mistake that if you don't iron out, you're gonna limit yourself from truly mastering that agent. So we're gonna break all that down, but go to the GameLeap website in the links down below for the highest quality advanced guides that you'll find anywhere on the entire internet. We have tons and tons of in-depth advanced content. So do yourself a favor, go check it out in the links down below. I mean, you got absolutely nothing to lose and everything to gain. But without further ado, let's jump into the video. Now, the first character on our list, Phoenix, is an amazing character that has a really diverse kit. His kit is very powerful and it's really well-rounded, meaning it does a lot of different things, right? He has LOS blocking abilities, he has an AoE, he has sustain, he has a flash to get in. He has a lot of different things going on, but the big problem with Phoenix is a lot of people really do not utilize his entire kit to set up the best type of engagements. While it might be appealing to just heal yourself or use both your Molly and your Flame Wall just to get yourself up to full, most of the time, that's not going to be the best thing that you can do. Denying an enemy LOS and sneaking onto point with your Flame Wall, or allowing your team to get onto site. Using a Molly to flush an enemy out of a hidey hole that you don't have to clear anymore at the very least. These are two examples that can be worth exponentially more value than the tiny amount of healing that you would just get out of these abilities. Because you got to start thinking about Phoenix's kit and each ability in that kit as something that is multi-purpose, right? It's very versatile and you can decide what is the best use for it in every given moment. You can use a Molly, for instance, to deny an enemy for swinging you. You could use it to flush out a corner, you could use it to heal yourself, and you could use it to stop an enemy from potentially defusing. I want you to really challenge yourself about using the entirety of your kit in different ways and really starting to learn the best ways to use it in any given scenario. Now we go to the next agent that I really wanted to talk about is Reyna. And the first thing that you need to remember about Reyna is now she only has 2 devours or dismisses. So she's gonna be a lot more limited than she was before. So you gotta be thinking about that before you just use them like crazy. This is gonna be a really important thing to keep in mind. Now, one thing that is actually important, it's a pretty interesting scenario that happens to Reyna. It's where you kill someone in a window, for instance, and they are actually above and over your LOS. You can actually use your heal, your devour, as long as you're constantly jumping. For whatever reason, the tether will not break. Now, this is something that you can do to ensure that you're healed, but remember, if an enemy's nearby, you're just gonna be jumping like an idiot and you're probably gonna die. Now, the last thing that you need to understand about Reyna, and the biggest mistake that I see in general, and this is one I've talked about before, but I'm gonna keep talking about it because it's so important, and it's just use your damn ultimate. Especially in ranked play, Reyna's a character that really has the capability of clutching rounds that no other character could win, and that's something that you want to have happen to you in multiple rounds in a game, right? But if you don't ever ultimate unless you're already ahead, you're never gonna see those scenarios. There's gonna be a scenario that maybe if you would have ulted, you could have clutched up, but because you didn't use it, not only did you not start off that entry kill, but you didn't have any form of repositioning plus sustain combined to really allow you to like 1v3 or 1v4. On top of that, because you're a high kill count character, you are going to be able to build up multiple ultimates throughout the game. So just get it, use it often, and you're gonna clutch up more and more. Then moving on to the next agent I wanted to talk about, we have Skye. Now, I don't have anything huge about Skye, but one of the big mistakes I see with Skye players is they really assume that a flash connection equals a fully blind enemy, and that's something that a lot of new Skye players will do is they'll flash a target, they'll know they're there, and they'll run in, but the enemy, of course, turned on that flash. They still got hit by the flash, they still got the flash sound, but it's a very easy flash to turn on, and just because you know they're there doesn't mean you know they're blind. But something that I would actually suggest you start trying on Skye is the fake bird rush. And what you do here is you throw out your bird, and instead of actually controlling it, you instantly cancel it to where you're not planning on flashing it at all, and then you just run. And a lot of times you're gonna see an enemy either shoot the bird and their crosshair placement's gonna be really bad, or they're just gonna turn and you were never planning on popping the bird in the first place, and you're just gonna run into an enemy that is not even looking at you, and that's gonna be really cool. Then we're going to the next character I really wanted to talk about in this video, and it's Raze. One of the biggest mistakes with Raze players is they do a lot of unnecessary movement / mobility. And you know what? I get it. You got blast packs, you want to freaking fly around like a psychopath, and sometimes you can catch enemies off guard, and if you're very proficient with it, you can put yourself in a position that enemies are not going to expect, and you can really rack up the kills that way. But unnecessary movement can be something that is very, very easily punished. Movement should be done with intent and not just because you can. Something that's important for you to understand is that in a fixed air movement, you are very easy to kill for good aimers because you cannot change that direction that you are in air. Of course, you could invest another blast pack, but flying through the air, you can't move at any given moment, right? But if you're on the ground, feet on the ground, you could move left, you could move right, you could crouch at a moment, and these are all things that the enemies have to predict and play around, and it adds an extra layer of difficulty in hitting you in the head. But when you're flying through the air, you're no different than a freaking aim labs target that enemies have practiced again and again, and unless you combine that with some sort of momentum or you're truly catching enemies off guard, flying in front of an enemy's LOS is just going to get you killed against any competent enemies. Now moving on to the next character I really wanted to talk about, it's Sage. Now, something that a lot of Sage players don't do into the higher levels is using their slows proactively. For instance, if there's two angles that you want to challenge and you know that you could get peeked from either one, you proactively slow one while swinging the other. And this is like a fragging Sage, an aggressive based Sage, but slow's really gonna disincentivize enemies from pushing through because they can't swing it fast or else it makes a lot of noise and they're not really swinging it that fast. And if they try to swing it slow, you have more than enough time to challenge one angle while you're preventing another. Now, something as Sage that is pretty difficult to do but really important if you want to get to a certain level is keeping track of your allies' health and death position. Death position is for reses. You want to know what allies died where, what their ultimates were, and different things you can keep track of because that's going to help you make a better decision later on for rotation, who to res, when you can res, and how to set yourself up in a position to res while you're safe rather than just thinking about it as an afterthought. And of course, tracking your allies' health because it's really good if you notice when an ally needs heals. Can you reposition to help them? Is it even worthwhile to help them? These are the hard questions you need to ask yourself, and it's better if you are thinking about this. But the last big mistake that Sage players make is a lot of times they don't imagine things can hop their wall. You need to be really careful when you're up against certain types of characters. Characters like Jett, characters like Raze that can hop your wall out of nowhere. These characters are going to really try to catch you off guard, especially if you consistently wall mid. For instance, let's say you're playing split, you keep walling mid, walling mid, walling mid. Eventually, they're going to realize that you do this. They're going to be pre-set up and they're going to punish you. And that's something that you can set up for and you can punish them right back because you're prepared for it. Now moving on to the next character that we got to talk about is Cypher. Now, just like with the previous example, a lot of Cypher players are not prepared for Jett dash. They're always thinking about, hey, someone's going to walk into one of my trap wires, I'm going to activate a cage, and I'm going to swing on them. But you always got to imagine that a Jett is going to dash right through your trips because that's pretty much the predominant rush strategy against any sort of Cypher, so definitely keep that in mind. On top of that, one thing that Cyphers do positionally on a point is they set themselves up in a way to try to get kills when enemies rush, but they also set themselves up in a way that is very difficult for them to back away if there's too many people, if they get overwhelmed. Something about Cypher that is really underrated and very powerful is having a camera that you don't reveal and using it for very effective retake strategies. You can gather information about enemies, you can point out their positions, and you and your team can retake really, really easily, but it requires you to live. And most of the time, if you can set yourself up in a way to maybe get some value or stall a little bit, but rotate off and live, you're going to get a lot of value on the back end trying to retake and retaking with your team. Then we go to the next character that I got to talk about, and it's actually Jett. And one of the big problems that people have is when to dash aggressively. How do I separate the dash into feeding versus dash into popping? Because it seems like sometimes I dash in aggressively and it works, and sometimes it doesn't. How do I be aggressive on Jett? Now, I can't give you a perfect answer to this because it's really subjective to the enemies you're playing at, the rank you're in, how consistently you are aggressive, but you do got to understand that the more aggressive you are consistently, the more enemies are going to play around that or try to put up some sort of resistance. Now, that is something that you could play around, but you got to understand that after a habit has formed over multiple rounds, enemies are going to do something to directly counter you, so you need to make variations in your aggressive strategy. One of the best ways I can describe when to use dash is using it in the exact moment that an enemy would be trying to set up to aggress onto your team or prevent your team from doing something with the utility. If you can figure out that timing, if you can try to get a feel for when enemies would be using their abilities, that is the best way to catch them off guard. But of course, if they're ready for you or baiting you, you're just gonna rush right into a trap. Now, using dashes as a defensive tool to run away, I like to call this like the spider sense. It's just a combination of game sense, but it's really just trying to get a feel for how greedy you can be, trying to get a feel for when you're about to die. Sometimes right when you get a kill, you should be instantly dashing, and other times you have a moment of reprieve to try to get more kills or gather more info. I'm not going to tell you that there is one catch-all way to play this, but it's going to be something that if you're thinking about it actively and challenging yourself over time, then it's going to be something that you're going to automatically get better then. But I would highly suggest trying to push the bounds, trying to get a feel for things. Yes, you're going to mess up a little bit, you're going to die a little bit, but this is a necessary growing pain to really turn into that god tier insta-locking jet that can revive. Now I'm going to the next character that I wanted to talk about, and it's Yoru. Now, one thing that you need to understand about Yoru is about most of his abilities, sadly, are not always the most consistent. Now, here's the thing. His footsteps might not always work. You can't assume that they're always going to bait an enemy. You can't assume that they are going to force a rotation, but there's a possibility. So it provides a little bit of pressure, but it's not much. It's actually not very much at all. So don't just throw footsteps in one direction and aggressively peek an enemy expecting them to not know that those were fake. Now, another thing you need to understand about the teleport is it's going to be far more consistent to use as a get out tool rather than a get in tool. Yes, we saw at the beginning a lot of flash teleport in plays, but that is no longer going to work if enemies ever see your teleport. They're just going to have their backs turned. They're going to either be facing in a way that is going to be impossible for you to flash them, or they're going to get flashed and they're just going to spray the place you teleport in, so you're going to die anyway. So typically you're going to have way more consistent value just using it as a get out tool. And then lastly, his ultimate no longer body blocks, which was one of the big utilities for Yoru's ultimate. So now it's going to default back to the #1 way to use his ultimate, which is to grab an isolated spike and just dip out of there. That's most likely just the most consistent, most straightforward value that you can get on Yoru's ultimate. Then we go to the next character, we have Omen. And of course, Omen has to smoke off, he has to smoke off heaven. He has to smoke off the entrance on the point and your team rush a point, right? That's typically the setup that an Omen uses. And a lot of times, Omens want to just really play in the back of the pack. They're watching that flank. Their teammates are going in, they're taking space. But I'm going to suggest you something that you can do in ranked that is very, very powerful. And you even see this in pro play. Someone like Nitro, who is, in my opinion, the best Omen period right now. And he does stuff like this, where after you use that smokes, those initial smokes, to really set up your team onto a point, instead of just watching the flank, you go and you start to lurk up through mid, or you lurk up through another angle, and then you try to catch enemies either one rotating, or you catch them in the default zone for the retake, whether that's CT or whatever. You're really catching them off guard. You see, you did your job as a smoker, as a controller, you got your teammates onto site, and instead of being a refragger where there's already multiple refraggers there, and instead of watching the flank, just standing there doing nothing, you're clearing out the entire flank path, potentially catching out an enemy in the process, and then afterwards you're on a flank yourself that can really mess up an enemy's engagement, and that's something that they might not expect. This is something that's extremely powerful for ranked play, so I would highly suggest you start to do it somewhat in your games and master the lurk style of Omen, because it's really powerful and definitely underrated. Then we go to the next character that we got to talk about, and it's Breach. Something that you should be doing with Breach a lot is fighting for map control aggressively, whether you're on attack or defense. You can do this by aggressively flashing any of the angles that people are likely to peek, whether that's a mid window, whether that's a middle area, whether that's tiles, whatever the case may be. You can use your flashes to stall for time, take space, allow your teammates to push up aggressively. Doesn't matter if you're on attack or defense, this is something that you should be doing consistently. You want to be using your abilities to create space, and you want to be diligent with your ability use them to gain that space. Don't be afraid of using them all. Don't be afraid of using multiple flashes. It's definitely worth it. It's better than you dying with a whole bunch of abilities just left on reserve. Then we go to the next character that we got to talk about is Brimstone. Now, you want to be using your molly and smokes for stall. We talked about this a lot, where you use them defensively. You use your molly, then you use your smokes, and you just want to stall enemies from rushing onto a site. Now, Typically on Brimstone, you want to make sure that you don't waste all your smokes. You have one that you can use a little bit aggressively, a little bit loosely, one that you really need for stall 100% of the time to stop the main choke, and then you have one potentially for retake. And having one for rotation on attack or retake on defense is really important, because there's always one angle that is very hard to contest, especially an angle like a heaven angle, for instance. If you do not have a smoke for that, it's going to be very difficult for you as a team to rotate there, because if any enemies in that angle, they're just gonna get some free rain on you. So having that one sandbagged smoke is pretty important on Brimstone. Now, the last thing that I would suggest for Brimstone is actually using a Phantom over a Vandal. And the main reason for this is because your smokes last for so long. One thing that a lot of enemies are gonna try to do is lurk through your smokes. And after you use your molly and your smoke sitting there, you don't really have a way to stop enemies from just lurking through the smokes. And if you have a Vandal, you could occasionally spray, but if enemies are on the other side and they see that spray, they could punish you. But with the Phantom, every once in a while, you can spray through your own smokes and flush it out. Make sure no enemy is getting cheeky with a Phoenix pushing into it or whatever the case may be. Then we go to the next character that we got to talk about in this video, and it's Sova. And a lot of people love the rollouts for Sova, and I'm not saying that those aren't good. Those are amazing, but you need to start thinking about Sova much more simply, because that's going to be the way that's going to get you consistent value on the fly. Think about the pillars or the big areas on the map, wherever map you're at, that you can stick a recon to, and it will reveal a large portion of that given point. These are very powerful areas that you should identify, and it could just be a top wall, or it could be a little ledge, or whatever the case may be. But these are places where at a moment's notice you could stick an arrow to and it will get a lot of value. You also need to be thinking about, what does a reveal do? How does it help an ally nearby if it reveals enemies? What rushes does it prevent if it tags multiple enemies? And does it let you reposition even if it gets no value or tags no one? These are all things that you could be thinking about before you use a recon. Then we go to the next character that I really wanted to talk about in this video, and it's Killjoy. And one of the biggest mistakes I see on Killjoy is when they're put in a clutch scenario, they don't utilize their full kit. Turret, alarm for flanks, nanos for flush. You have tons of utility that is really effective even for a 1v1. You could peek with the turret, allowing you to actually get a notification if enemies peek a right angle. It slows them, and you can more aggressively take a different angle. You have nano swarm to flush enemies, and you could put your turret down. You could flush enemies out of a hole. They swing out into your turret, and now you got a little crossfire going on. You got that alarm for flanks. Maybe you think an enemy's rapping. You can set your alarm down. Being able to proactively and quickly put down your utility in a way that's going to help you in the 1v1s is going to be a way that you clutch up a lot on Killjoy, because I promise you, attack or defense, Killjoy is a character that is typically going to be one of the last people alive, and you're going to be put in a lot of clutch scenarios where if you can clutch these up, you can win a lot of games. Then we're going to the last, but certainly not least, character in the entire game, the MILF herself, Viper. And the biggest mistake I see when playing Viper is selecting her at all. No, I'm just kidding. One of the biggest mistakes that I see with Viper is players don't really get quick enough with setting up all of her utility on a fly. You need to often be able to quickly throw a toxic orb, set up a screen, also use your snake bite, and quickly just take a point back. Essentially, being able to go through the motions with Viper as quickly as possible and with small margin for error is something that is an absolute must on Viper. And if you really are dedicated to be good with Viper, I would highly suggest just going into the practice range and saying, okay, what if they're rushing this site? What is the wall that I'll use here? What is the orb that I'll use here? If they're rushing this site, what will I do here? What will I do here? And these are the things that you really talk to yourself, you practice to yourself, so you get to practice them over and over again and make sure that you're really fast statically, so that when you're in a game, you don't have to think about it too quickly. You don't have to be imagining, oh, or lining it up on your mini map. You already know exactly what you need to do. And then the last thing about Viper is you gotta know when your walls help or hurt your teammates. Coordinate with them, talk with them, and make sure that you are not inadvertently really screwing your teammates, because that happens a lot on Viper, where Vipers just want to throw up their utility whenever it is full charge. But go to the GameLeap website in the links down below for in-depth advanced VODs over every single character on this entire list. If you want to master any agent, do yourself a favor, go check it out in the links down below. But I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for coming by. That's all I got for you today. I'm Coach Mills. I love your faces, and I'll see you tomorrow.